Thank you, Howard, and good morning, everybody. I'm glad to see a crowd here. I didn't know if anybody really was going to pay any attention when you got this beautiful museum to wander around. So, I'd say that what I'm going to do today is trying to cram several decades into a few minutes, but I'll do the best I can to at least hit the high spots for you. But I just suggest that we're really going to be talking about two very improbable events today. The first one was when an Swedish-American inventor named John Ericsson agreed to build a ship like no one had ever seen before and have it launched in 100 days. And he actually pulled it off. Imagine if you were building a whole new type, a whole new class of vessel today, steel-hulled warship today, how long it would take just to get the paperwork done, the appropriations and all. So that's the first thing we'll talk about. But the second thing is the improbability of us actually being able to recover objects from the Monitor and have them in a museum for all of us to enjoy. And I think as I get into this, you'll see what I mean. So I don't have time to go through the history. Most of you probably know a little bit about the story of the Monitor and the Merrimack, which is really the Virginia. How Merrimack comes into this is the South, when they broke away from the Union, they did an assessment of what they had available to fight a war, and it wasn't much. They didn't have many warships. They didn't have many manufacturing facilities. And so they knew they were going to have to scrounge for everything they had. And so one of the things they did was to recover the scuttled hull of the USS Merrimack and used the lower part of the hull. It had been burned and sunk on purpose. They used the lower part of the hull to create this new rebel monster, a ship like no one had ever seen before. It didn't have masts and sails, and it didn't have 100 guns. It was really fairly low profile, and it instead of a wooden upper deck, it had an iron reinforced upper deck, and the gun ports just stuck through the iron. Well, the word that the Union or the Confederates were building this ship got up to the north fairly quickly in those days, and they realized that this could be a formidable weapon. We need to do something. So they formed an ironclad board at the Navy Department, and they put out a request for proposals for people to design a ship that could combat this new southern menace. And there were several proposals and several ships actually built, but the most unique and controversial was Ericsson's design for a warship that he eventually wanted called the Monitor. And you can see, even compared to the Virginia, this was quite a radical ship. And most of the admirals on the ironclad board thought, well, this won't do. You know, a first-class warship of that period had maybe 100 guns and sides 30 feet high off the water. And here's this thing, when it's fully loaded for battle, it only has 18 inches of its hull above the water. Everything else is below the water line. And for guns, 2 guns, sitting in a little box in the center. One of the nicknames was cheese box on a raft, and other derisive terms were used as well. So this was the design. It was finally approved, and it actually was built. And he almost made his deadline of 90 days. It was a little over 100 by the time she was actually launched. And then jump down to Hampton Roads, just a few miles from where we're sitting right now. On March 8th of 1862, the newly commissioned USS or CSS Virginia steamed out of its port in Hampton Roads, or in down the Elizabeth River in Portsmouth area, and steamed out into Hampton Roads and just began to lay waste to the Union fleet there. It steamed out and charged into the USS Cumberland. Cumberland was rammed and hit with cannonballs, and firing back, all her cannonballs were just bouncing off the Merrimack's, the Virginia's casemate, and so she was quickly dispatched. And then the Congress was the next to fall victim, And it would have been even worse, except that Virginia drew so much water by then with all the extra weight of armor that she had to watch the tides. If you know this area, there's some really badly shallow areas down in the Hampton Roads. So the pilot on board said, that's it for today. We gotta get back in before we run aground. So that was the end of March 8th. And in a story that only a fiction writer could dream up, this actually happened. That night, that very night, Monitor arrives in Hampton Roads. A day late for the challenge, but if you think about the drama here, had Monitor come down a day earlier, it wouldn't have had the same effect. It still would have been remarkable, but what made the next day so remarkable was when these two ships met after a day of demonstrating the power and effect of these new weapons. And so March 9th, 1862, it's a beautiful Sunday morning, nice bright day, and rumors had come out about the meeting of these two new heavyweights, and so people were coming down from church, some of them all dressed up, and the Hampton Roads became an arena, became an arena for this battle between the ironclads. And like two heavyweight fighters, they slugged it out for 4 hours, each trying to find a weakness, each approaching from different angles. But the bottom line, if you ask people in this room, there'd be a whole range of interpretations of the outcome of the battle. Who won, who lost, did anybody win? To me, the most important outcome was that neither one could sink the other. They both survived, and it became sort of a landmark and milestone in naval gunnery and naval technology that the wooden warship had no more use. It was obsolete almost overnight. It had been coming for a while, but this was sort of the last straw. Well, so they've survived the battle, but neither one made it to the end of the year. It was starting with the Virginia. She had to be scuttled by her own crew only a couple of months later, and she was set afire, run aground at Craney Island at the mouth of the Elizabeth River. Because why? She didn't have a home port anymore. The Union troops had come back in. They'd taken over the whole area, and Virginia drew too much water to motor up the James to help out defending the capital, and she wasn't considered seaworthy enough with all that weight up high on the hull to go out to sea. So sadly, they had to scuttle her, and on May the 10th, her magazines exploded from the fires that had been set on board, and that was the end of the hope for the South as far as breaking the Union blockade of Confederate ports. Monitor hung around all summer with the sweltering heat of Tidewater, Virginia, with all this iron plating. The conditions below deck were described in great detail by the crew, and it must have just been horrible. But she was ordered later to be towed by the side wheel steamer Rhode Island down to one of the southern ports to reinforce the blockade down there. She really wasn't intended to go to sea. That was one of Ericsson's strong recommendations. She was built for harbor defense, but the Union decided they needed her at sea, so they took her out, and she was under tow. She got off Cape Hatteras, and all of you probably know what happens when you go around Cape Hatteras. You've got a good chance of being hit by a sudden storm that can really be very severe. Monitor unfortunately fell into that condition. Her tow lines to the Rhode Island parted, and she was adrift, and before much longer she sank there with 16 of her crew still on board. And as the paymaster William Keeler said afterwards, what the fire of the enemy failed to do, the elements have accomplished. The Monitor is no more. So there it was, New Year's Eve, 1862. We lost America's newest warship, a unique ship. Others would be built, but this was the original. She was in deep water, no good position fix taken because of the storm, and there was no way to salvage anything. Well, later on, as technology started to develop, people became curious, could they find the Monitor? And people looked for years. And sometimes there was a claim that she'd been found, but no confirmation. So it wasn't until 1973 that a scientific effort was made. People were, I don't know where they got the idea of where to look, but Ernest Peterkin, a retired Navy captain, said, well, you know, the Rhode Island's logbooks are still at the archives. We can see what her course was. And so he got a NOAA navigational chart and copies of the logbook from the Rhode Island, and he plotted Monitor's course, and he allowed for set and drift and the conditions that were described in the storm. And he laid out a rectangle off the coast of North Carolina and said the Monitor ought to be in there. Well, in August of '73, they found a number of targets, and one looked to be the right size. And you can see here there's a map. By the way, I want to just very quickly point out that the four discoverers of the Monitor are these four gentlemen: John Newton, Harold Doc Edgerton, the inventor of the electronic strobe and the side-scan sonar, Bob Sheridan, who was a geologist, and Gordon Watson. This was all done under the auspices of the Duke University Marine Lab. But here's sort of the deal. Everybody expected to find the Monitor just lying on the bottom and a nice turret in the middle. But what they found instead was the weight of the turret had caused the ship to roll over. The turret fell off, and the ship came down on top. The hull came down on top of the turret. And so with the limited electronic equipment of the day, the pictures were so fuzzy and unclear that there was talk for months that, well, this doesn't look like the Monitor. Some people were convinced, others were not. But finally, that was put to rest the following spring. In April of 1974, a group of us were privileged enough to be able to board the Alcoa Sea Probe, a ship that was unique in its own right, and go out to the Monitor and lower an instrument pod down and take enough pictures to make this photo mosaic. Now, in today's photo mosaics, if you have any experience with that, it's all done electronically, and you got all these beautiful things that can eventually turn into this virtual reality. If you haven't done the virtual reality tour of the Monitor, you got to do it. But at this point, we were developing 35 millimeter black and white film, cutting out the individual pictures and using Scotch tape to paste them onto a board. And that's how the first mosaic of the Monitor was made. But at that point, we convinced everybody it really was the Monitor. And so what to do? You know, this is 1974. The Monitor's off the coast 16 miles in deep water. There are no laws to protect it. And so everybody began to say, well, you know, it could be damaged by a trawler, or salvage could go out. And this is America's history. We've got to do something. How do we protect the Monitor? Well, another stroke of amazing coincidence, U.S. Congress had just passed a large omnibus bill that included creation of a National Marine Sanctuary Program, which was designed to protect important underwater sites, sort of like national parks, except underwater. And the bill was passed, but no regulations or anything had been promulgated. But they decided that this was the only way to protect the Monitor. And so on January 30th of 1975, the anniversary of the Monitor's commissioning, Monitor became the first National Marine Sanctuary. And this is quite a program. I was very proud to be a part of it. We're up to 15 sanctuaries now and 2 national monuments, a huge amount of underwater real estate that's being protected now and saved for future generations. And I just wanted to quickly say congratulations to the Sanctuary Program. This October will be the 50th anniversary of the creation of the program, and I think they've accomplished a great deal, and I can't wait to see what's coming in the future. All right, let's have a look. Let's make a dive. Here's what it looks like on the Monitor now. This imagery is brand new. It's just done in May. You can see that the Monitor is a very beautiful sight, a lot of pretty coral and fishes. But if you look at it from a naval structural point of view, it's kind of sad because the whole lower hull has collapsed, and a lot of the iron has been corroded by all this exposure to seawater for all these years. And it's at a depth of about 240 feet. And here's a view from the side. You can see the turret here, which is, by the way, 22 feet in diameter just for scale. And here's the hull lying on top of the turret. And all of this area along here is just a void. There's nothing to support the hull. And so the forces over the years and the deterioration are causing a collapse in that area. Plating is falling off the deck. So it's really started to deteriorate. And so we knew by the mid-70s that we had a problem, that the ship was really falling apart. But what to do about it, that's the problem. So we knew we needed more data. And so in the ensuing decade or so, a number of different organizations came forward to assist NOAA in trying to get out and get the data we need. One of the ones that we worked with most frequently was the Harbor Branch Oceanographic Foundation in Fort Pierce, Florida. They had a pair of submarines called the Johnson Sea Lynx that could hold 4 people. And in 1977, they made the first trip out to the site. And the first artifact that they spotted lying outside on the sand near the turret was the last thing seen of the Monitor when it sank in 1862. And that was this red signal lantern that was hung from the turret to note its distress and hopefully allow for the rescue of the crew. So that was quite a find. They also recovered an armor plate for analysis and did some other measurements and observations. The real excitement, though, for me and for several of the other archaeologists involved was in 1979, we actually got trained up to dive from the submarine and dive on the Monitor, the first archaeologists to visit the site. And this is the submarine. There's a big bubble up here that 2 people sit at regular 1 atmosphere. And that's depicted here on this diagram. And then behind that, there is a chamber that 2 divers fit into. And again, they're at 1 atmosphere for the trip down to the site. And then they're able to pressurize the chamber, leave the sub, make a dive, come back in, and then when they get back on board the surface vessel, they transfer down into a full-size recompression chamber because we have several hours of time we have to slowly come back up to surface pressure so we don't get decompression sickness. And just a little side note, when I got invited to do this, I was so excited I didn't think about what I was agreeing to until I got to look at this submarine. And I got to tell you, I'm claustrophobic. And I told Gordon Watts, who was the chief archaeologist, that I thought we were friends, and here he is trying to stuff me into what looked like an oil drum. And I won't tell you how much I wrestled with that before I finally was able to actually get in there and make a dive, but it was crowded. But it was also incredibly exciting. We made the deepest archaeological excavation dives ever recorded. And I'm not sure it could still be a record. I doubt it. This day and age, somebody must have gone deeper. But for trained archaeologists to actually dive this deep and conduct excavation, we were able to get 2 of the subs out there at the same time. And we set up a grid, just like archaeologists do, and we excavated in an area that turned out to be very close to the captain's cabin. Recovered quite a few artifacts, recovered a lot of data and videotape. And so this really helped us quite a bit on determining the condition of the Monitor. Then we followed up in 1983. You notice a gap there, 79 to 83. That's about how long it took for us to get all our resources together and get another trip scheduled. But at this point, we were recovering the Monitor's anchor, which was sitting up above the seabed and was deteriorating pretty rapidly. It was out on its own. And this is a drawing I love to put this in here because that's me. I got to make the first dive to connect up the harness to recover the Monitor's anchor, and then other divers went out and did all the hard work. But it worked. We were able to haul the anchor to the surface, and there it is with Curtis Peterson, the conservator, getting his first look at it. And if you've wandered around here a little bit, you may have seen the anchor on exhibit here. If not, keep an eye out for it. It's another Erickson device, a real funny looking anchor. It looks like a grapple, but it was the main anchor for this ship, very different from others of the time. I want to just take a second here to point out that during this interval of 85 to 98, NOAA had no diving capability, and so we were relying on partnerships with a lot of other organizations, public and private, to get more data, amass more data about the Monitor's condition. And so this is just some of the people that helped out during that period. We were keeping up with the deterioration of the wreck all this time, and it was very evident from all the work we did and all the data we collected that it was starting to disintegrate at a faster and faster rate. And people say, well, John, it's been there over 100 years. Why now? It looks like you're making this up, right? You just want to get more money to go diving. But no, it's the best analogy I could come up with is my Kentucky analogy. When I was growing up in hills of Kentucky, we'd occasionally drive about 60 miles to see my grandmother. And there was an old barn there, and it always looked like the same old barn until one day we went by and the barn was all collapsed. I think it's the same kind of thing here. You've got deterioration going on at a microscopic level in some cases. And this corrosion is being affected by the strong currents and storm action. And just occasionally you have one of these catastrophic collapses in the hull. And we knew where that was headed, that we were going to lose the whole thing. And so first question that NOAA had was, what can we do? Can we stop this? And so we set about putting a plan together to answer the question. So first we have to define the problem, convince ourselves, and then convince other people that it really is a crisis situation. And then of course the next thing you have to do is you got to propose a solution if you expect anybody to help. So we came up with a long-range plan that concluded that if left on the seafloor, Monitor will disintegrate at an increasingly rapid rate. And this was the tough one. That complete recovery of the hull and contents is not viable. That was a tough one. All of us wanted to bring the Monitor up in its entirety. But first of all, you're talking about 1,000 tons of shipwreck that's in a fragile condition, a badly deteriorated condition. And we just knew that there was not enough money available in a 10-year period to collect up to bring the Monitor to the surface. And then the conservators got in the act and they said, whatever it costs to recover it, it'll probably cost 10 times that much to preserve it, put it through the conservation process. So we thought recovery of everything just isn't feasible. And we were worried that if we held out for complete recovery, meanwhile the wreck has collapsed and we've lost what we're trying to preserve. So next step is to come up with a preservation plan to propose to people. We had 6 phases, but the main 4 phases are these. To first recover the propeller, which is sticking out way over the stern and not very well supported and causing stresses to the rest of the hull here. And then to support, I mentioned that there's this gap underneath the hull that's causing all of this to collapse downward. We needed to support that somehow. And then we wanted to recover the steam engine. It was also an Erickson patent, very unusual for a lot of reasons that the conservation folks can fill you in on. And then, of course, the big enchilada, 120-ton turret plus contents. And we needed to find a way to lift it. That sounds real simple on paper, but when you try to figure out the engineering aspects, really difficult. So we finally I met up with Captain Chris Murray, who was at Mobile Diving Salvage Unit 2 at the time. And is that right, Chris? Yes. And it turned out they had a new mixed gas portable dive system, a flyaway dive system that could be used in deep water, mixed gas and all. And timing again, timing is everything. Somehow Chris and I got together and realized that this monitor would be a great place to test this thing. And so we were able to get out to the monitor in 1998 to try and recover the propeller. And on June 5th, the propeller and 11 feet of the shaft, and you can see the propeller here, were recovered by the Navy team. And so we proved that we could get out to the monitor. The tough conditions out there could be dealt with, and we could recover things. So here's the propeller after conservation. So we made the first step, and then I could keep you here the rest of the day, and I promise I won't. Just trying to discuss some of the efforts we went through to get the funding to go to the next level. But some of the people in this room were instrumental in making that happen. But next step was this whole stabilization. There's the gap. What do? Well, what the Navy came up with was pretty neat. You take these huge, heavily built bags down, slide them up underneath the hull in those gaps, and you fill them with concrete called grout type of concrete. And as that hardens up underneath the hull, it forms a level of support that is still helping support the monitor today. So we knocked that step out, and so now we're ready for the engine. Well, we had several tons of weight we're talking about for the propeller recovery, and now we're looking at least 35 tons worth of engine. And there again is the engine compartment back there, not well supported, some of that's kind of fragile, and you don't know what might be loose and fall on a diver's head. So we did as much work as we could with photographs and video and computer drawings to try and sort it out and define things as well as we could. But all of this time we were wrestling with a big question. How do you remove a 35-ton engine and bring it up to the surface? And in one piece, please. So I can't remember. That's one of the missing things I need to look up now. I can't remember who designed the method of recovering the engine. But I think he must have come from the same part of Kentucky I'm from, because back in Kentucky, a typical Kentucky engine puller, you get the kids swing set, and you hook a chain fall to it, and you add a hammer and a bottle of beer, and you got yourself an engine, no problem. So here's what the engineers came up with. See the similarity? So how does this work? Well, first you lower this huge bridge structure down and put it over the monitor, straddling the monitor. Why are we doing all this? Why not just hook a cable to it, lift it out of there? Well, because we had to disconnect it from the hull, and all the piping and plumbing and stuff had to come loose. You can't do that when you got your surface ship doing this kind of movement. You got to have a way to hold it steady. This was the only way any of us could figure to do it. So you put the bridge down. The spreader slides back and forth across so you can line up over the hull. And then this ELF is the engine lifting frame. And so that's connected to the spreader. Then you can lower that down and you can move everything around until, sorry, I'm back up there, until you're lined up directly over the engine. Then you've got a solid platform to connect from. And so now we need a lot of time on the bottom to do this. The Navy divers have been going down on a stage, 2 at a time, connected to the surface with an umbilical and the current pulling on it. It's really strenuous, slow work. So it was calculated, some Navy and engineering folks got together and decided, we can't really do this the way we're talking about doing it. We have to we have to have more dive time on the bottom. And so through another whole series that could take all day to really explain, an arrangement was made to get Navy saturation diving capability. But the Navy didn't have a saturation capability in-house at the time. And so a special dispensation was made to allow a commercial saturation system to be used by Navy divers. And that was no easy feat. But so what is saturation? Well, in normal surface applied diving, these guys go down on this stage, they make their dive, they come back up, and they stop at different intervals along the way back up, and then at a certain point they shirk up to the surface, they throw them in a chamber, and they finish their decompression in a chamber on the deck. And that's a very lengthy process, and you can't do anything else until that whole process is complete. The saturation system, on the other hand, the divers go into a chamber on the deck. They're pressurized right then and there to roughly the same pressure they're going to find on the bottom where the monitor is. And then when their dive time comes, they transfer into this diving bell. They leave the chamber, they go over the side, and they can work for hours because they're already at the pressure that they need to be. And then what about decompression after several hours in the water? Nope, no problem. You come back into the bell, you get dropped back into the chamber, they lock you in a hot meal, and you get some sleep, and you're ready for the next day. It's so incredibly efficient compared to the surface supplied. And this gave us statistics that you see on the bottom there. 666 hours of total bottom time, 70% of it was with the SAT system. And that's not to say that the other guys weren't still useful. The surface supplied guys still did a big set of tasks that contributed to the whole thing. Well, meanwhile, I'm sitting there saying, you guys are having all the fun. So I'm petitioning the NOAA dive office to let us go out and do some diving. And the first answer was hell no. And eventually, Craig McLean and I and one other NOAA diver got special dispensation for a proof of concept set of dives. So we got technical dive training and got our team together with East Carolina University and some other folks, and we got to dive on the Monitor. And the Navy thought we were just a little bit crazy, and I can't deny the possibility of us being down there untethered, no communication, relying totally on our own equipment and our dive buddies on the bottom, using mixed gas and having limited bottom time. But actually, the Navy sort of gave us a little bit more credit after they saw how mobile we were. They're dragging their umbilical around on the bottom, and we're sort of floating around and able to make observations. And occasionally they'd say, hey, next time down, could you guys just take this and move it over to there? Yeah, sure, we got it. Help you. So it worked out that all of us had a role in this. And July 16th, it all came to fruition. The Monitor's engine came up, still attached to the lifting frame. So we had a 35-ton engine, and I forget the whole lift was well over 100 tons, but it worked. So it's lifted up, it's set onto a smaller barge, and trucked back here, where the Mariners Museum had built a tank right next to the tank with the propeller in it, and the engine was lowered in there. And you probably know, but I should mention it anyway, that when these things have been underwater for this long, whether it's organic materials or metals, you can't just let them dry out. So it's really important. This engine was sprayed with water all the way back and then put in the tank, and the tank filled. Because once they start to dry out, bad things happen, which the conservation lecture will fill you in on. All right, now we've come to the big time. We brought the engine up, we got the technology down, we've got the teamwork down. We even had the funding by this point. But how do you raise this turret? We knew the turret itself weighed 100 tons, and then it's got two, I think, 16-ton Dahlgren cannons inside, and plus it's full of silt. It's filled up entirely to the top with silt. And I say to the top, but actually the turret is upside down, So the top is really the bottom. Problem there is the roof was never made to support any weight. And so we knew that if we didn't do something to support that roof, that as we tried to lift, everything inside the turret would just dump out and spread all over the seabed. So this meant months, literally months, of working with the ocean salvage engineers and Navy personnel and our own archaeology team to try to come up with some way to lift this turret without any of these bad things happening. Again, we went back to our research. There are a few photographs of the Monitor. That's one. And then we had drawings that were done by Erickson and his team. And again, our computer design. Now, looking at the problem, here was our second problem. The turret's here, 22 feet in diameter. We need to make it vertical lift. There were theories about dragging it out from underneath the hull, but we didn't know if it could withstand that kind of stresses. So the decision was made to remove this whole section of armor belt, which was already starting to deteriorate, and give us direct access to the turret. That was another tough decision. How do you do that? Well, here was the plan that was finally agreed upon, the spider and the platform. And the spider is 8 legs, and each leg can move out about 15 degrees, so it's like you're going to pick something up. So you lower it down over the turret, and each of the legs then can be moved up underneath the lip of the turret individually until you have it grasped all the way around. But that doesn't keep the roof in. So you pick it up just a few feet, slide it over just a little bit, and set it down on this big steel platform that's already been pre-positioned next to the turret. And the two of those are bolted together, they're attached together, and then you're ready for a lift. And here's what the whole thing looks like in diagrammatic form. So that was the theory. And then after much ado out there, fighting the weather and equipment and the Monitor itself putting up a fight, we were able to get the same, not always the same team, but some of the same people, and definitely all of the same types of divers out there. Here was our objective again: turret, armor belt. First thing, the armor belt had to come out. That turned out to be quite a chore, worthy of another lecture. But here it is. Isn't that incredible? There's the Monitor's turret with the armor belt removed, complete access to it. It was quite a sight. But what to do with the silt? Well, the Navy got to be underwater archaeologists for a few days because we had to remove some of the silt. We actually had an engineer from Phoenix International sitting there with a laptop on the deck saying, nope, still not enough. Got to get more silt out of there. So the excavation continued for a while. And then finally, we were ready. And so this is a frame grab of the spider coming down, just easing over the edge of the turret, settling into place. And after a few little snags of getting all the legs clear of obstructions, the Navy divers used hydraulics to push those legs back up under and grasp the turret. And look at this, August 5th, 2002, 20 years ago yesterday, 5:45, yeah. Most beautiful rusty sight you've ever seen. That was a quote of one of my coworkers, and it really did work beautifully. So she was set on the deck, and guess what happened next? Back to the museum. And so this barge actually lands on the museum's property on the edge of the river, and then it's transferred to a trailer and towed up again to a waiting tank. And the tank had to be built before the Monitor center because you couldn't have gotten it into the tank otherwise. So the tank came before the Monitor center did. And then we got to be land archaeologists. Now we got the turret that's dry. Well, it's kind of muddy, but we got to go in and finish the excavation. There is the two cannons were still inside. Remember, everything's upside down, so you're actually looking at the carriages here, and then the tube of the gun is underneath. And one of the carriages, by the way, if you haven't seen it, it's on display down by the entrance to the conservation lab. That's really neat. It's come along beautifully. There we are, excavating inside. We found not only the guns, but we found all the tools that were used to serve the guns, rammers and sponges and worms, and no ammunition up there. In fact, we haven't found any live ordnance on the Monitor at all. Another really amazing find was we found an intact boot and also this officer's coat, which the conservation lab here is beautifully restored, and it's a pretty amazing sight. Somebody had apparently cast that off. The Monitor's turret was the only way in and out of the ship, by the way, when it was at sea. So everybody had to go out the turret to escape. Somebody ditched that big heavy coat before they went out. And of course, now everything's here at this beautiful place, the Monitor Center, part of the museum and park. And you all are here and have free run of the galleries to see representations of what the inside of the Monitor would have looked like, and to see some of the artifacts as well. And I hope you signed up for one of the tours of the lab. We got a sneak preview yesterday, and pretty amazing stuff. I'm going to quickly go through what the museum has been doing since 2002. And the reason I say quickly is two reasons. One, I'm running out of time. And two, there's going to be an excellent lecture at 1 o'clock by Will Hoffman, the head conservator, to give you details. But anyway, the engine came in a year before the turret, and the museum started working on it. And we had some historical information to go by, but basically it was just chemistry and hard work. And there's sort of what it looked like coming in. And just a miraculous transformation to what it looks like now. And same thing was going on a year later when the turret came in. Work picked up on trying to deconcrete, remove all that corrosion product, and that too is making good progress. Nothing like this has ever been done at this scale. There have been other engines and other ship parts recovered, but I think we ended up with something like 200 tons of material that we delivered to the museum over the years. That's unprecedented. Sadly, we also found two of the Monitor's crew that had been trapped inside the turret when the ship went down. And fortunately, we had prepared for that eventuality. We had a forensic anthropologist on board from JPAC, the facility out in Hawaii that processes human remains from all military sites, U.S. military sites. And he took charge of the recovery of the bones, a lot of which had to be done by the Navy divers before the turret came up. And we also found a number of personal items associated with the two crewmen. The most moving, I think, was when we uncovered all the bones and we found that one of the two crewmen still had his wedding ring on his finger. And so I can tell you the Navy really shifted gears when they first found human remains on the turret. Everything was done with dignity and respect, very carefully. And as I say, it truly was moving. The divers working on the bottom started referring to the human remains as their shipmates. That really got to me. But we wanted to do the usual analysis, and amazingly, they were able to get pretty good DNA from both of these remains. But we have had no luck so far in identifying the two by name. But we did do facial reconstruction. It was done by a lab in Louisiana. And so they miraculously put these two together. And so you're looking at the faces of two men who served their country and didn't quite get out that night to be rescued. Even though we don't have their names, they were buried at Arlington National Cemetery with honors, and hopefully someday we'll go back and amend the plaques and add their names. And just to finish up with a quote from Grenville Weeks, who was Monitor's surgeon. Their names are for history, and so long as we remain a people, so long will their work of the Monitor be remembered and her story told to our children's children. The little cheese box on a raft has made herself a name which will not soon be forgotten by the American people. And events like today demonstrate how all of us coming together, and with the help of the Mariners Museum and Park and the great conservation team they've put together here, we're telling that story, and the story is not over. The story will continue as the conservation continues, and I hope that one day we're all gathered here again for the unveiling of the engine and turret in the galleries. Thank you very much. One last shameful plug here. I'll just mention that if you want more details on some of the recovery efforts and all, there's some good histories of the Monitor, lots of good ones. And even a couple of good books on recoveries. But this is my effort to try to tell the whole story that you've just heard, but in more detail. And I think we're going to have a book signing opportunity coming up later on too. Thanks again.